The talk today is the first part of two, and the next one is going to be in the middle of June, a month from today. So the first one is entitled, well, both of them are entitled Introduction to the Energetics of Consciousness, and the first one is going to be in the sciences, and the second one is going to be in the arts. So I'm trying to cover a lot of material. Today, I'm not really going to present a theory, I'm just going to give you lots of different pieces of information, basically. And the main focus is going to be on two videos. One is of a scientist called Wilhelm Reich. It's a presentation given about him. And the second one is an introduction to free energy devices, which is going to, my opinion is that it's a hidden science, basically, that's going to destroy all theories of solar and wind energy and all the rest of it. These things are not, as far as I can see, they don't have much of a future in our world. So I want to show you the hidden science that's really the thing that I'm interested in. So most of it's the first one's going to be mostly energetics. You get a sense of, okay, I understand the energy debate hopefully today. The next one's going to be more about consciousness. You might not really get the psychological part today, okay? I'm going to try to make a connection between the two as we go along. So I'm hoping that the people come today can come back for the arts section next month, and then you'll see more of the connection between the two. I'm not great with technology, so I've just set up a Word file with a few pictures in to start off. I just want to contextualize these two videos that we're going to be having a look at. And I'm going to start with some pictures of different people. There is a lineage to what I'm calling hidden science. There is a kind of a hidden history to it. I'm going to be jumping around in a few different people who are parts of that history. And so I'm going to begin with Einstein. I'm going to begin with two people, actually. Einstein's the first. And two people that don't really normally get lumped together. And that is Einstein. Lovely picture here. I love this quote I got from the internet. Imagination is more important than knowledge. And that's from our well-known scientist Einstein. The next person is a personal favourite for me as an artist, William Blake. And William Blake, I've got a few quotes here from him. Man's perceptions are not bounded by organs of perception. He perceives more than sense can discover. Reason, or the ratio of all we have already known, is not the same that it will be when we know more. So he's basically saying the way that we look at life is we have a sphere of knowledge and it travels, okay? And what I would say is that belief is much more important than knowledge or what you can prove, because your imagination is always structuring what you can discover scientifically. And of course the very famous quote from William Blake, when the doors of perception are cleansed, everything will appear as it truly is, infinite. Again, he's saying that we can prove something that is beyond appearance, and that's going to be part of it. The next people I just want to show you pictures of is, first of all, a guy called Colonel Tom Bearden. I'm going to read a quote from... He's a scientist, by the way. He's an electrical engineer. And I'm going to read a quote from him about what he calls this hidden science and how it has been kept hidden. It's quite a long quote, but it will give you a sense of his feeling about how this history, this scientific history, has been kept hidden. And this is a quote from his book called Energy from the Vacuum. Yes, in addition to these petty little conspiracies, there really is a great conspiracy. In fact, there are many of them. Churchill just referred to the entire set of conspiring cartels as the High Cabal. This is a loosely knit set of extraordinary wealthy cartels but that between them control much of the financial power of the world. You can only find the principles behind a couple of hundred of interlocking corporations if you penetrate deeply enough. So he's talking about politics generally to begin with. Much of their great financial income comes from the control of energy at its various levels, and that's why I'm talking about this today. Something like $2 trillion per year is their take from energy worldwide. Oil plays a great role in that. These high cabal fellows make or break nations financially, as is almost being done in Argentina as this is being written. He was writing this in the early 80s. They also have been stopping coefficient of performance greater than unity electrical power systems. We might generally term that as free energy. Since shortly after the turn of the century, using whatever means are necessary, fair or foul. That is why we are still burning oil, coal and natural gas, and why our automobiles and trucks run off gasoline and diesel, and not off free electrical energy from the vacuum. The High Cabal intends to keep it that way. Some of the major primary means of stopping invention have been as follows: manipulation and improper use of the law, involving the unsuspecting inventor in drug charges by planting drugs on his property surreptitiously, then secretly notifying the drug enforcement officials who suddenly raid the premises and discover the narcotics, resulting in the inventor going to jail since he was caught red-handed. Threatening the inventor's life and the lives of his family to frighten him away from what he is doing. Arranging a fatal accident for the inventor, such as a fatal auto accident, a fall from a high place, or drowning. Assassination. Hitmen are fairly simple to hire. A good one is a bit more difficult to hire, but it's doable. A good hitman might assume a disguise and fake a robbery, shooting and killing the target in the robbery. In an extreme case, he just fires at a distance with a professional sniper rifle that is silenced. A variation is the use of a throwaway assassin, a fellow who has been deeply conditioned by very harsh methods to deeply involve his autonomic nervous system. He can be spotted by the glaring eyes effect of autonomic nervous system involvement. So he's talking about mind control. This fellow is only marginally functional in real life and requires a handler. He also must fixate for some minutes, usually from 20 to 30 on the target, by staring at him for a period. And he talks a little bit more about that. Making the inventor an offer he cannot refuse in the old mafia sense. In the latter, nicely dressed persons come to the inventor's house, meet with him, and offer him a large sum of money to quit what he is doing for the rest of his life. The going sum varies between $5 and $10 million. The offer is real and cannot be refused. Either the inventor accepts it, or he and all his family are dead when these gentlemen leave the premises. If the inventor refuses anyway, he and his family are killed. Usually the bodies just disappear and are never found or heard from again. These days, variations are used, such as a careful task of another crask of another auto into the back of the inventor's car, so an invented accident. So he is really shaken up badly but not hurt. He goes to the hospital for a checkup in case of concussion, etc. Everything is seemingly okay, but he is kept overnight for observation. That night he is given a hypodermic of air in his veins. Next morning his family receives a call that the inventor has suffered seizures from an apparent concussion and is fighting for his life. Then there's the ice dart dipped in curare. Sounds like a detective fiction thing, but this is actually a scientist talking. The curare paralyzes the muscles of the heart and lungs. The inventor goes down in convulsive floundering, gasping, and unable to breathe or pump blood. He expires very quickly. The curare breaks down in the body, the ice melts, and you have a fellow the medics find dead of convulsive heart seizure. And he goes on and on. And there's many different things that he talks about. And we'll see, when we look at the video, we'll see why these people are so intent on killing scientists in this way. So we'll come back to that. But that's the quote from his book. And in the video we're also going to look at a guy called John Bedini. John Bedini is an inventor, and he's been working in the field of electronics since the early 80s. And the video is only a couple of years old. So we're going to be looking at him, and he's going to be presenting some free energy devices. Now, Nikola Tesla, maybe some of you know Tesla. Most of these free energy devices in the video are based on Tesla's theories. So when you come to free energy and you start looking into the topic more deeply, you notice that a lot of these people are influenced by Tesla. Tesla, most of his inventions were in the late 1800s, turn of the century. And again, a bit of a mysterious character, created what we know today as our, electricity systems. Many of them. There's a big influence on mainstream science as well. Unfortunately, most of his theories disappeared when he died. I think it was just before the war. I think it was 39. The other legend is that Tesla was rejected from, the fields of commerce and corporations. He was hired by the corporations, say 100 years ago, and then kind of dropped mysteriously when he wouldn't go along with what these people wanted to do with his theories. And so people said that he became this kind of lonely figure, and he was just like staying in a hotel, and he died alone in a hotel. That's absolute rubbish, as far as I know from my research. He was actually hired by secret government agencies well into the 30s, and there is a strange connection between him and I'll get back to Stubblefield in a minute. There is a connection between him and the Philadelphia experiment. I don't know if anybody knows anything about that. The Philadelphia experiment was a US Navy ship that was treated to a scientific theory, basically. They tried to make the ship invisible, and it's become kind of popular fiction, but it was actually based on a real story. And Tesla was involved in some of the early research into how to do that. And he was working in the Philadelphia experiment with a guy called John von Neumann. He was actually a very, very famous mathematician in mainstream science. And that's von Neumann. The other person, when we get to the video, that you may hear that giving their name is Nathan Stubblefield. He was a farmer, and he actually developed a form of energy where he would basically take a metal stick and plant it in the ground, and he had some kind of a mechanism in this stick where he could actually draw light directly from the earth. And it was magnificent. People would travel to his farm and see this, and he also set up a security system all around his farm where he could send signals through the air, and he could hear people. He would have a little bell in his apartment, in his little house there, and he could actually hear people. He'd have a bell when people came on the property, and he would run signals through the air. So it would if somebody crossed the property line, it would ring in his house. And he had all these little inventions, not very well known. But Tesla actually found him when he moved to the US. And so Tesla and Stubblefield are connected. This is just a potted kind of introduction. Next person I want to talk a little bit about is these people will all kind of be used later on in the rest of the talk. Wilhelm Reich. Reich was a scientist, psychoanalyst, studied with Sigmund Freud famously in the 1920s, and was a psychiatrist. And he did a lot of research into psychoanalysis, psychiatry, and eventually he invented what he called an orgone box. And it was kind of a box that would heal people from different diseases. And that brings me to the first video. This is a short, I'm not going to give the history on Reich. I'm going to let this guy do it. His name's Peter Robbins, and he's an independent researcher. I'm just going to play about 20 minutes of this video to give you a sense of what Reich is doing. The reason these people are all connected is they're all having problems with government organisations. They're fighting for their lives, and often they're accused of being insane and such things. So I'm just going to play this. Could we have the lights down? Is that alright? This is just an intro to Reich.
So, for me, belief in the reality of this technology doesn't really enter into the equation. Some of these weather modification operations attracted UFOs. First over southern Maine in 1953, then above Arizona in 1954, where weeks of cloud busting culminated in what I can only characterize as a battle in the skies over Tucson. Wild as these allegations may sound, they were well documented and multiply witnessed, but I am getting ahead of myself. Wilhelm Reich was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1897. His father was a stern government bureaucrat, his artistic mother a piano teacher. Willie, as he was called as a child, and his brother Robert grew up on the family's rural estate and were educated by private tutors. On this estate, they saw regularly animals having sex, natural functioning, and he fell very quickly into a pattern of being very open to the forces of nature. Though half Christian and half Jewish by birth, Reich never practiced any organized religion and grew to observe that all organized religions tend to be the source of considerably more ignorance and suffering than enlightenment or happiness. In 1914, the Balkans erupted in flames, and over the next 4 years, World War I swept away all of what we knew of old Europe and the Reich estate. Reich served with distinction as an artillery officer in the Austro-Hungarian army until the war's end. With all of the family's holdings now vaporized, he made his way to Vienna, where he enrolled in medical school and supported himself as a tutor for the duration of his studies. He was drawn to Vienna in part because of his intense interest in the then pioneering work going on around Dr. Sigmund Freud. After graduating medical school, he not only became a pupil of Freud's, but arguably his most brilliant disciple and his first assistant for 6 years. His work as a psychoanalyst and as Freud's assistant kept him occupied till 1929. And here you see a picture of him as a member of the Psychoanalytic Polytechnic Vienna Conference, 1922. Reich is seated fourth from the left in the first row. Now, Freud and Reich parted ways in 1929 when Reich, after much clinical work and observation in the early traditional psychoanalytic tradition, presented case findings to Freud supporting his view that not most human dysfunction was based in some kind of sexual neurosis, but that all human dysfunction, misery, sadness, neuroses, had a sexual problem at its root. Freud and his followers, of course, subscribed to the theory that many, if not most, of these problems had a sexual basis. And at the same time, this was a little bit more than Victorian Vienna and Freud himself were willing to deal with, and Reich left. Reich's departure from the Freudian ranks actually created a backlash of resentment among many of his colleagues and resulted in the origin of the myth of his mental instability. It was something that would follow him for the rest of his life. You see Reich at the far left here with a group of communist sympathizers in Vienna in 1927. The young doctor and veteran became involved with the Austrian Communist Party in 1927. His intention being to marry the revolutionary mission of their idealistic and already existing mental health clinics to the restoration of happy, healthy sexual functioning in working-class couples. Responsible sex education, contraceptives, were freely disseminated at the so-called sex pole, their aggregate word for sex and politics clinics. And their popularity extended from Austria into Germany until the collapse of the Weimar Republic, and then into the Soviet Union, where for a time they were allowed to thrive. Now, much to the upset, if not the horror and shock of the communists, was that if a working couple who might have come in with ignorance or guilt or sadness or an inability to truly let themselves go in a loving embrace, if they were restored to a happy, healthy sex life, a terrible thing happened. They began to put their own happiness, the happiness of the children, and their well-being as a family above the goals of the Communist Party. Well, obviously this was a travesty that could not be allowed to stand. And in 1934, the party expelled Reich, their rationale being that the once brilliant scientist was now manifesting symptoms of insanity. The essence of his alleged mental illness is reflected in this obviously unhinged statement, quote, "This is what I am fighting for, the prevention of emotional human misery by the establishment of a normal and natural, that is, orgastically satisfying, human life in the masses of people," end quote. Now, to any group of individuals intent on controlling the lives and thoughts of other people, these are the words of a truly dangerous man. The party never forgave him for this, and efforts to damage his reputation and impugn his work became commonplace from 1934 on. Reich remained an avowed anti-communist for the rest of his life. Driven from Austria, then from Germany, just as Hitler consolidated power, he emigrated to Norway. Here he continued with his experiments and therapeutic practice, aided by a core group of colleagues, and devoted much of his experimental work and study to the dynamics of cancer formation in human beings. His outstanding books, The Impulsive Character, Character Analysis, People in Trouble, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, and The Cancer Biopathy were all written during this period. He emigrated to the United States in 1939, and in 1940 was invited to be a professor at the New School for Social Research in New York City. Reich settled in Forest Hills, Queens, then a quiet district of the borough where he established a private practice, continued his writing, and refined his character analytic therapy. It's also referred to more technically as medical orgonomy. Energetic functioning in people was now his primary interest, and his key efforts were directed toward dissolving the chronic muscular contractions and armoring of his patients. This armoring, quite literally, would serve to block natural feeling and hold neurotic behavior in place. It was during this time that Reich discovered the specifically biological energy, which he called orgone, and a simple therapeutic and experimental device that could concentrate the energy and allow it to be measured in a laboratory setting. He named the apparatus the Orgone Energy Accumulator, or ORAC. The size of the accumulators Reich and his associates constructed over the years varied from that of a small box to that of a large room. A properly constructed accumulator is made up of alternating layers of organic and inorganic material. Steel wool and fiberboard were found to be ideal for the purpose. The non-metallic, organic material tends to attract and hold the atmospheric energy, while the metal, inorganic, also attracted the energy but unable to absorb it, rapidly reflected it. As such, the exterior of an ORAC is always constructed of the organic layer, while the interior surface must be metallic. The accumulator works on the basis of what Reich termed the orgonomic potential. That is, unlike the conventional energy systems we are accustomed to thinking of in terms of, in which the energetic potential moves from the stronger system, the source, to the weaker one, orgone energy, flows from the weaker system to the stronger. Reich persevered with experiments designed to isolate and confirm the reality of this energy, But aware of the controversy an announcement of such a discovery might cause, he continued to verify his findings without seeking either public acknowledgement or official scientific verification. One of the experiments he developed was calculated to measure the heat inside of an accumulator and compare it to the temperature inside of an identically sized control box. The experiment was named TO-T. Reich and his colleagues observed that a change in the atmosphere would alter the temperature differential, and TO-T established itself to also be a reliable predictor of changes in the weather. Now, if there is any conventional explanation for this temperature differential, one that can be demonstrated under laboratory conditions, I'm not aware of it. In late December 1940, Wilhelm Reich sent a carefully worded letter about his work to Albert Einstein, arguably the best-known scientist in the world at the time. The letter, written in German, said in part, quote, "Several years ago, I discovered a specific biological energy which in many ways behaves different from anything that is known about electromagnetic energy. The matter is too complicated and sounds too improbable to be explained clearly in a brief letter. I can only indicate that I have evidence that the energy, which I have called orgone, exists not only in living organisms, but also in the soil and in the atmosphere. It is visible and can be concentrated and measured," end quote. And as I am using it, I'm sorry, that's not the end of the quote. "And as I am using it with some success in research on cancer therapy," end quote. The physicist responded by letter 6 days later, apparently intrigued enough to invite Reich to demonstrate this claim in person. The meeting was arranged through Einstein's secretary assistant, Helen Dukas, and set for January 13th, 1941. That afternoon, the two men met for more than 4 hours. Reich had brought along several experimental devices to demonstrate the findings, and Einstein observed the glowing orgone energy for himself through a laboratory apparatus designed specifically for that purpose. Seemingly unwilling to believe his own eyes, the great scientist is on record as acknowledging the decided glow, but refused to rule out what he described as, quote, "the subjective factor." It was toward the end of their meeting that Reich told Einstein of the measurable heat created inside the accumulator, and then at that point their conversation completely shifted into the implications of such a discovery. Reich noted in his diary that Einstein's response had been, quote, "This is impossible. Should it be true, it would be a bomb, a great bomb," end quote. An understandable reaction, given that the heat differential repeatedly observed in this experiment violated the second law of thermodynamics. That is, that equal volumes tend to equalize in temperature. In anticipation of the meeting, Reich wrote, quote, "Orgone constitutes the field that Einstein is searching for. Electricity, magnetism, gravitation, etc. depend on its functions." Following their discussion, Einstein stated that he wanted to verify that temperature differential for himself, and Reich agreed to return to Princeton the following week with the necessary laboratory equipment. Einstein spent a week conducting and reconducting and studying TO-T, and on February 7th wrote to Reich that he had confirmed and reconfirmed the scientist's findings. The accumulator had registered an average 0.3 to 0.4 degrees centigrade higher than that of the control box. That might not sound like much, but I'm reminded of the wonderful talk that Robert Cook gave us several days ago, talking about it wasn't a matter of moving this huge bar 8 inches. If it moved a fraction of an inch, Newtonian laws were out the window. But then, one of Einstein's assistants offered a simple explanation. The differential had been caused by convection. That is, the difference between the air temperature under and above the table the accumulator had been placed on. Einstein had set it on a tabletop and suspended the control box in the air. He closed his letter to Reich. "I hope this will awaken your sense of skepticism so that you will not allow yourself to be deceived by an illusion that can be easily explained. Please have someone pick up your instruments, since they are of some value. They are undamaged. With friendly greetings, A. Einstein. Stung, Reich wrote back imploring Einstein to reconduct the experiment, but this time following the strict protocols he designed to eliminate such a false explanation. In his letter, Reich even describes his having repeatedly and successfully conducted TO-T with both boxes buried underground, thus eliminating any possibility of convection. But Einstein seemed to have lost all interest. Reich thought it memorable that the physicist had been so willing to accept the first explanation that had come along, and at his refusal to reconduct the experiment under properly controlled conditions. The letter ended with a plea for some respect and consideration. None was forthcoming. We don't even know if Einstein saw this letter. At the time, all of his mail would have been screened by Helen Dukas, who may have had her own reasons for not wanting her employer to confirm Reich's findings. Now, both Dukas and Einstein were put under fairly close observation by the FBI from the time they first entered this country in 1933. And while the FBI was aware of the physicist's left-leaning sympathies, they strongly suspected Ms. Dukas of being an active Soviet intelligence asset since at least 1929. There is credible evidence to support their belief, some of which I included in last November's Crash Retrieval Conference talk on this subject, which I'm indebted to my friend Ryan Wood for inviting me to put together. I will also refer you to an extraordinary work of scholarship that I'm trying to get back into print. Only 500 copies were ever printed, of a wonderful book by author and researcher Jim Martin called Wilhelm Reich and the Cold War. But the evidence to support Ms. Dukas's being an active Soviet agent are overwhelming. The Food and Drug Administration, let me just close that sentence. Letters from Reich and his colleagues and from Einstein and his assistants continued to be exchanged over the next few years, but without any resolve. And these letters are available in archival form from the Wilhelm Reich Museum in Rangeley, Maine. Now, the Food and Drug Administration began to build their case against Wilhelm Reich in 1947. The red flag that had alerted them to the danger of his work that it posed to the American public was an extraordinarily vicious and inaccurate article written by a journalist named Mildred Edie Brady. The Strange Case of Wilhelm Reich appeared in the May 26, 1947 issue of the New Republic. Other biased and distorted articles followed. Time magazine's offering was entitled The Marvelous Sex Box. Brady's article was a masterpiece of distortion and attacked Reich's sex racket, while trumpeting an out-and-out lie, namely that Reich had stated the orgone accumulator was a cure-all. Now, Ms. Brady was not your routine freelancer. She had a history of involvement with communist causes and was, among other things, a respected member of the drug regulation elite who actively helped to create FDA legislation as early as 1938. She was also a founder of Consumers Union, which I must stress at the time, no longer, was a communist-dominated organization that had broken away from Consumers Research Incorporated.
I've got another picture of that. Probably won't all fit on. But that's the actual machine as he's actually experimenting with it. Okay, well, I'm kind of trying to go through a few different things. That's the orgone box, and there's a picture. People would sit inside, and he was working on cancer therapy, so he's using this for treating cancer patients in the mid-40s. Okay, that pretty much finishes the video presentations. I've tried to cut them a little bit short because we don't have a lot of time. The other thing I'm going to suggest for the next presentation is symbolism, the use of symbolism in science for energy. And I read a very, very interesting book by a guy called Joseph F. Farrell, who's done some research into secret Nazi technology during the war. And this is what he discovered, something that they call die Glocke in German, which is the bell. They call it a bell. And it seems to me that you've got like an officialized science, which is using that same system of the circular magnets joining each other and pulling the whole thing round in a circle. And you have this occult technology used by different people. And Farrell even suggests that the Nazi swastika is actually a symbol of a secret science, a secret energetics. But we know that the Nazi symbol is not really Nazi anyway. It's actually an Aryan symbol for different countries. Many different countries have the same symbol. But if that is reinterpreted as a methodology for energetics, I think that's something that would be very interesting for people to consider. And I'm going to look more at symbolism in the next lecture, especially as it relates to the arts. But that's pretty much everything that I have for today. So thanks very much for coming and thanks for your attention.